you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Katie. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
So awesome. I would love to hear a little bit about your ADHD diagnosis journey before we get started. So, how long ago were you diagnosed with ADHD, and what were some of the signs? Some of the things that led you to really put two and two together.
So, I was officially diagnosed last year in 2022, probably the latter part of the year at age 48. So, I think that I've always known that I was a little bit different, that I thought differently than other people and I kind of reacted to things differently than other people. And for me, probably around the time that I went to college and started to learn, and I went to college for psychology and started to learn all the things, and I kind of got into the ADHD part of it, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's me. That sounds like me. And so I've always known, and then kind of really understanding some of the actual symptoms and the criteria, and I thought, oh yeah, that's so me. And then it kind of just takes me back to all of the things that were so unusual, right? That I thought were unusual, that people would tell me were behavioral kinds of things. You need to not interrupt. You need to slow down. You need to think through things. And yeah, so getting a diagnosis was affirming for me, if you will. Just, oh, I get it. I understand myself now. So,
Right? And I remember the first time I heard that statistic of like kids with ADHD hear 30,000 more negative remarks when they're growing up, which I don't know how they came up with that number, but it's believable when you start thinking about all of those traits, right? Where it's like years we're told over and over and over again, like, yeah, stop interrupting, or just all of these things that sort of naturally bubble up within us as children, we're taught to suppress over and over and over again.
absolutely. I can remember all of that. Last year for me, I was doing a lot of things, I had a lot of things going on with like school and work and all of that. And I just got to a point where I could no longer function. Right? I couldn't function anymore. It's having a hard time. And so the idea of I need to do something. And like I said, yeah, it was very affirming for me because just of what you said, all those years of my life, just hearing, it's very damaging to your self-esteem, right? To
Mm-hmm.
think that something must be wrong with me. I can't do things the way other people can. I can't focus as long as other people can on these kinds of things. I can't finish a task. Why can't I do an outline and do a report over like a week or two? Why do I have to procrastinate and wait to the last second? Why am I always so tired? So all of those things.
Yeah, I feel like I've pontificated about this, how so many of us are diagnosed with depression and anxiety long before an adult diagnosis, right? And it's that feeling, I feel like the question of what is wrong with me is oh, I feel like that might even be the diagnosis, because I feel like you were saying, it just reminded me of how for so many of us, our intentions are pure, our intentions are good, right? Like it's this disconnect between our intention and how we're being perceived by others. The way in which we are constantly unintentionally disappointing the people around us that leads to the depression. It's not this sort of sudden thing we've caught, like the flu, but it's really this buildup over and over and over again of like, why am I this way? What is wrong with me? Why can't I be different? All of those questions that we have inside of us, of feeling like at the end of the day, like we're disappointing the people around us.
Absolutely. Something that you said is so interesting for me, this idea of depression and anxiety. And so many people have those diagnoses and that's what's being treated, but no one ever stops to think that there's a cause for that, right? So the reason I'm feeling anxious or depressed, just like you said, the disappointment, other people, disappointing yourself, wanting to get things done and not being able to do it and thinking like I'm a failure, right? Like I just I simply can't. I simply can't do that. How many times I had told myself over the years, like that's not for me, right? That's not for me. My personality doesn't work that way. My brain doesn't work that way. I can't do those things, and it's like, wait, no, I can do anything. I I just need to do it differently, right? I need to find my way to do things. And so you're right. The misdiagnosis, um, we're treating this one symptom, but we're not really getting to the cause of what's going on. And so that's what's really important for me, especially for kids, right? To be able to help parents understand there's a reason for all behavior. Behavior just doesn't happen, right? Like, your child is not struggling with the impulsivity or schoolwork simply because they're, you know, I don't know, they want to make your life difficult. You know what I mean? That there's something, that is a sign that they need some more support. What else is going on?
Yeah, that I feel like is one of those realizations that transformed how I parent, right? Which is this understanding that a child always wants to do well. So if something is happening, it's not, there's a block there. Like there's a place in which they need support. And so our job is to help them get there and to not, chastise them or punish them or all of the things I think our parents did in terms of like the character, right? Just like, oh, you're being lazy, you need to work harder, all of those ways in which it's like, I'm going to punish it. I'm going to punish this laziness out of you. And really realizing that again, like coming back to that idea of like the intention is always to do well. So if that's not happening, there's something there there's a disconnect. So do you work primarily with kids or do you work with adults or who do you prefer to work with? Or I guess not prefer, but who do you work the most with?
Sure. We actually work with adults and kids. And so we do executive functioning for children, and starting with, I guess we start about age 7 or 8, right? And so because we understand that executive functioning is something that grows, and we're taught and through like learning, and it's something that it's skills based, right? We build executive function skills, right? And so come to finding out, children that may struggle ADHD, autism, some of and some of there's a barrier there then to building the skills in a way that teachers and parents kind of expect them to do. And so we work with children primarily with those executive functioning skills. We work with children that have ADHD, but we also work with adults that have ADHD too. And ADHD and some behavioral health types of things that go along with that. So for sure, the anxiety and depression that comes from um, reaching for goals that are sometimes a struggle to attain because of the diagnosis, because of ADHD, or because not really understanding. And so what is important for me, like I said, is really helping parents understand, because I was one of those kids like you just talked about that was super understood. I can't even imagine how many report cards said, she's so smart. She's so smart, but if she would just apply herself. And I was one of those kids, I knew I was smart. I was obnoxious is the word that I like to use, actually. I was that obnoxious kid that would love to let the adults around me know how smart I was. And, like, yeah, that's not really what it is. But I had a hard time controlling what I should and shouldn't say, right? And working in, we do behavioral health coaching. I'm also a therapist. And so working with children and families and seeing children, just to your point, getting disciplined and having parents be very frustrated and tired and thinking that we're doing everything, we're doing all the behavioral things, we're doing all the charts, and we're taking away all of the privileges, and they're still struggling in school. And even to the idea of parents really worrying about friendships, because sometimes the ADHD gets in the way of social stuff. And so if that kids that really have a hard time making friends, and because of the impulsivity, because of the things they kind of blurt out and say, and hearing parents worry and be concerned about social things. And so I specifically work with kids and families because I want to be able to bridge that gap. I want to help kids understand, like, there is nothing wrong with you. And there are some wonderful things about your ADHD that we consider superpower. There's things that you can do that other people can't do. And you need to know what those strengths are and use them to your advantage. And so there are workarounds for everything that's a struggle. And so helping them understand that, helping them find their path, and helping their parents know exactly how to support them.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's a mouthful, right? So, because one of the things I've often said since my diagnosis was like, I had never heard the term executive functioning until after I was diagnosed with ADHD and started to do my own research. And then I was like, why isn't this taught explicitly in school? Because I felt like God, my life would have been so different if I had understood what was happening at a much earlier age. And I think also just the explicitness that a lot of us wish we had more. I think about all the times that my parents were like, go do your homework, and they just assume what to do, right? So many of us, I think, who are diagnosed in adulthood had that feeling of like, everybody else seems to have the manual. I didn't get the manual. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing right now. And you talk about like, it's the same thing with relationships and conversation and like all of these ways in which in our life we feel ill-equipped because we didn't have very, very specific instructions that were needed when it came to like the executive dysfunction breakdown. But like, I'm like, how do you teach executive functioning to like a 7-year-old? Like, what does that look like? What is that? I guess I'm like, how do you explain that to children in a way that they would understand?
Sure. A lot of it has to do with modeling, right? And talking to children about what kinds of things get in the way for them, right? So let's just use the social aspect first, because that's one of the things. And so kids will come and say, I don't have any friends. Like I want to make friends, but I don't know what to say. Okay, and so then we start with this idea of, okay, who is it that in your class that you want to make friends with? Like, tell me who you think is cool, And this idea of what would you say? And well, maybe I'll say this. Now, what do you think they might say back? And kind of walking them through kind of that stuff. Like, because really, executive functioning is just being able to think through the whole thing, right? Being able to think from the beginning to the end, and that's kind of what gets in the way. I don't know what to do next, and so kind of helping them with that, and it works for social situations. It also works for like the schoolwork and things, right? This idea of being organized. So we know being organized is the thing, okay, we can organize all of our stuff, but what do you do next? Once you do this one piece, then what's the next thing that you have to do? And sometimes for little kids and as they get older, we do it for adults. Sometimes we work backwards. Like, what's the end goal? Then what do you have to do from there and go backwards until we get to the very beginning of it? But a lot of talking through it and then hand holding through it, modeling and doing role plays if necessary. When there's a lot of that, what would you say if your friend says this back to you? What's the appropriate thing to say? And kind of just helping them take step by step by step, like, oh, okay, I have this, and then practice.
Right? Yeah. I think that was one of the things that was fascinating to me when I thought about, oh, the signs were there all along when it came to my ADHD was how often I did rely on scripts, social scripts, of like, what am I going to say when I get into this situation? What are some things? And even my husband has like these, he would say he would have these like, keep these questions in his back pocket when he meets new people. One of his favorite ones is like, what are you reading these days? Because it's like, everybody wants to tell you what they're reading, right? And it's like immediately puts the onus on the other person to talk. But like how important it is to have those like memorized or to have those tools in your back pocket that for those of us who really do struggle, especially with the anxiety of what to say next.
Sure.
Gosh, so important. So when you looked back over the course of your life through this new lens, what were some, I know you talked a little bit about childhood, but what were some of those things that you think of where you're like, oh yeah, the signs were clearly there all along?
The one thing that really stands out for me is that I can remember years ago, I was very young and I wanted to build a website and I did not know how to do that. And I can remember being very focused on, I'm going to do this. I'm going to build this website for a business I was starting. I was like probably in my 20s, and I stayed up all night. I started doing it at, I would say, 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And the next thing I know, the sun was coming up, but like that time had gone by so quickly. And I just remember, how did like 12 hours go by so fast? I can't. And so always the hyper focus, right? Always, if I needed to get something done, I could just sit down and I could do it. I've always been very creative, and so I could teach myself to do almost anything. Like that particular day, I taught myself how to build a website without any knowledge of how to do it, knowing how to do it. But yeah, it's always been that way. If I get on something, I'm on it. Again, interrupting, I still do that. At my age, I still have a hard time waiting my turn. I'm having conversation with someone and I have this thought and this idea and like I want to say it right away. And so it's funny that I always tease because I'm always like in this moment where I'm just kind of like, and I want to say something. People that are close to me are like, okay, Gloria, do you want to say something? Like, yes, I do. Because it's that's always been something that's been for me, right? Struggling with the impulsivity, wanting, interrupting, procrastination, school. I could never, in high school, they teach you how to write an outline. We talked about that earlier, how to write an outline and get everything organized to write a huge paper, a term paper. Oh my gosh, if I try to write an outline, it's going to be a hot mess. I can't do that. I have to sit down in front of blank paper and just write, but it's going to come to me and it's going to be amazing and I'm going to get an A, and I can remember telling a teacher that and I'm like, that doesn't work. That doesn't work for anyone. Like, you're just like, yeah, it actually works for us. Like at the last second and it just kind of flows. And so it's always been that way. And so, as an adult, kind of looking back on it, I'm thinking, oh yeah, that was my ADHD.
Oh my gosh, exactly, right. And not only that, but like you said, it has to be the last minute. Like, it's not going to come out. Even if I tried to do it a week in advance and maybe convince myself that I would have all this time to edit and all this time to, like, it doesn't work that way. And I wish I could tell my younger self, like, don't spend all this time feeling bad about your process. Your process works. So accept it and be glad about it. And don't spend all of this time feeling like you're doing something wrong, right? Or even like you said, spending all night building a website, which I've definitely done in the past, right? And that hyper focus where you're like, oh my God, I've had to go to the bathroom for like 3 hours and I'm on the edge of my seat and I haven't even noticed. But, the ways in which we do those things when we are in hyper focused, but then we come out of it and then we're like, essentially think of ourselves as lazy because we can't do, taxes or something. That's incredibly boring. And the fact that it fascinates me how our sense of self is that we are lazy, and yet there's so much overwhelming evidence to the contrary. And that was actually one of the things my therapist pointed out to me, which I didn't even understand was ADHD. I thought I had bipolar because I would, have these manic episodes where I would do stuff like that. And then, she was like, why, but I would come into therapy and complain about how I was this lazy, messed up person who could never get anything done. And she was like, what are you talking about? Like, you do all of this crazy stuff. But we don't see ourselves that way. I'm like, why? Why is our self-concept so messed up? That's my question to you as a therapist.
Yeah, but I do think it goes back to what you said earlier, and this is so unfortunate, but to my point about why I want to work not just with children, but also with families, right? Because to be completely honest, our self-concept is messed up because society has us feeling that way. That's
Yeah.
what it is, right? Like, it's everyone else. It's everyone else. It's not us. The
No, for
reality,
sure.
the reality of it is that because it's neurotypicals, right, operate a different way, and so that's kind of how the world is set up. And so when you are different, it's been that way from the beginning of time. No matter what the difference is, different differences make people a little bit crazy. They don't seem to understand, and so it's always that, and so you feel different. Right? My process is different. I do things different than my friends. I'm doing things differently than what my teachers are trying to teach me to do. They're telling me to do it one way. I've tried it and I failed, so I must be a failure. And so where is that concept of just like your therapist? Like, no, but you got it done. You just had a different path, right? And
Mm-hmm.
being able to rethink through some of those things. So that, I don't want to see kids grow up with that negative self-concept anymore. Like, it's sad. Like,
Yeah.
it's definitely sad. And so it's, really important to pick out strengths.
Well, it's funny, I started out as a coach and now I'm going back to school to become a therapist
Yeah.
because I felt like a lot of the clients I was working with who had a negative point of view about therapy, had a negative experience with therapy. They really wanted coaching because they wanted something, actionable. They wanted, goal oriented. They needed that executive functioning structure and support from coaching. But a lot of the time we ended up talking about childhood trauma and stigma and all of that stuff where I was sort of feeling like I am a coach, but I'm acting like a therapist. This feels unethical, but at the same time, it feels integral to the conversation, right? And so I was like, let me just go back to school get my certification because I feel like I can't do one without the other, right? And so I'm curious, now you were a therapist first. Is that why you pursued coaching or is that what was talk me through your experience with just sort of therapy and coaching and what is the difference for you and how do you integrate those? That's like eight
Sure.
questions in one, but
That's okay.
you know what I mean.
Yeah. And look at the difference between coaching and therapy. Coaching is very focused on the here and now, right? And it's interesting what you said because you can't take away the past because the past is what got us to today, right? And so, of course, we're talking about all of the things that are the barriers to us moving forward right now. Sometimes it is past things, right? When clients start to talk about things that require a new diagnosis, meaning if I'm doing ADHD coaching and that diagnosis is already there, it is what it is. When they start talking about things that may require new diagnoses, then they need to go to therapy, right? Because I don't do that as a coach. And I think the misconception is that if you're doing coaching, that you can't really talk about past things. Well, you can. Again, like I said, you need to touch some of that. Like, where does that anxiety come from? And especially if we're talking about ADHD, just as we've been talking this whole entire time, the anxiety and the sadness, whether we call it depression or not, right? The sadness that people feel come from this idea of failure and their self-concept. And so you do have to incorporate it. I think what makes me a really good coach and what will also make you a really good therapist, right? Which is that we have that those experiences, right? As a therapist doing coaching, I as you're going to school, you probably already know like some of the things that we're taught in clinical mental health counseling is like how to validate, how to move conversations along, how to bring people from one place to the other. We call that attending skills. And so the things that you say and that you don't say to kind of help, clients kind of come to their own understanding of what their goals are. And if you're a therapist and you move into coaching, then you already have those skills, right? You already have all of that to do, right? And coaching is really about, okay, what are your goals? What's happening right now? You're trying to build a business. You're trying to go back to school and things are getting in the way. You've got a paper that you need to do. You're not doing, if it's a kid that you're not doing well in your math class and you need to be more organized or whatever the pressing present issue is, then I'm using my therapy skills to get them from where they are in this very present moment to where they want to be. And for me, that's what coaching is. I'm going to meet you where you are today and take you to where you want to go. And if we have to talk about the past, it's just to help us understand how you got to where you are today, and that's it. That makes sense.
Absolutely. I mean, I almost at this point I feel like that would be essential. If I was looking for an ADHD coach, I would honestly look for a coach who already has counseling background because for me they are so integral and yeah, right. And so much of this of moving forward, so much of establishing new behavior patterns is examining why you had those other behaviors in the first place. Like it just feels like you can't have one without the other. And to,
Yeah.
but I also think that requires a lot of training. I mean, you have how many degrees now?
Yeah. Which I don't even know how I got through school. But I think I got through it. So.
I know, right? I want to talk about that too because one of the things I do talk about with a lot of my guests who are Black women is education and kind of the masking especially in higher education, but just masking in general, right? And how the stigma around mental health and mental health diagnoses. Did you find when you were diagnosed that there was how did you, I guess, like come out, or did your family members did they already know? Sometimes I feel like we're like the last ones to know, and everyone else is like, oh yeah, we already knew that.
Yeah, I don't think for me and in my particular family structure, it wasn't really anything that I had to really share with anyone, really. It's really it was my own kind of process that I was going through. I'll be honest with you, for me, the reason why I got the official diagnosis is because I was finally ready to take medication, right? And
Mhm.
so I've always known that, and again, getting the training, I could self-diagnose myself. Like, I'm totally, and we do this thing, where it's kind of like, and people do it a lot now. And once you have the official diagnosis, it becomes annoying, but people have this habit of saying, "Oh, I'm so ADHD." Like, "Oh, I have ADHD," and people do it that are not, neurodivergent. And once you realize, you're kind of like, "No, you're not," and you're not gonna make fun of that or make it like a flippant kind of idea. But I did it too. But I knew that I was pretty sure that it was ADHD because of what I understood about ADHD, right? And I was going to school. I was getting a master's degree. I was getting the most recent one that I have, and I was working like two jobs, and I was just taking care of like life and all the things that I need to take care of. And as I got older, I'll be 50, and it just what I used to be able to do, the masking that I did, and the overcompensating became harder. I just couldn't. I was having a hard time keeping up with everything, and I was always tired, and my grades were affected by it, and it was harder for me to pull out that last minute term paper at the last second like I could do 10, 15 years ago. And it was just, and so I think just as we get older, the normal progression, and sometimes the decline in function, right, and coupled with the ADHD, it was just too much for me. And I had finally come to a place, and I'm not one that, I'll be honest too, as a therapist, even as a coach and someone with ADHD, I'm not a fan of medication. So I was kind of like, I don't want to take it. I just really don't. And it's interesting because, I think therapists make the worst, patients as well, because they tell everyone else, you take your medication. But I didn't really want to. I wanted to think I could do it on my own, which is, that happens so much. Like, I don't want to have this extra help. I've been doing it all these years. I can do it. And I think my body and my brain just finally said, you cannot do it. You need help. You're not going to graduate unless you do this. And so I went to the doctor, and that's the person that actually had that reaction the way the family would. And I said, he gives me the test, to take, and I'm talking, and I'm scribbling all the answers down. And I said, yeah. And I think it's time for me to have Adderall or something. And he took it from me. He barely looked at it, and he says, okay, yeah. So, and I'm thinking, you knew this all along. But, this is the doctor I've been going to. And he's thinking, you absolutely have ADHD. Yes. So here's the meds. You take them. And so I've been taking Adderall. I'm a person that doesn't take it every day. I've talked to some other people that feel as though they need to take it every day. I talked to my doctor about it, and we've decided that on the days that I have lots to do and I really need to focus, so I don't have the extended release one. I kind of just have the as needed, and I take some days where I kind of need to focus, and then other days I'm okay without it. And that was kind of how we went through that at that time, because I was so inundated with schoolwork and all of those things. And so he said, listen, you don't need to take it every day. Take it when you know you're going to wake up and you're going to have a day where you've got a million and one things to do and you're likely not to get it done, and do it. And so that's what I do. And it works. And those days I feel the difference, like, oh, I can focus and I can get through some things. And, if it's the weekend and I have nothing to do, then I don't take it, and so I think for everyone it's different. Like I said, I know a lot of people that no, I got to take it every day or I'm not going to be able to function. And that's great. Some people, the ADHD meds don't work and they take other things. And so for everyone, whatever works, they talk to your doctor and your therapist and kind of get what's going to work for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting when you say I want to be able to do it on my own, right? And I'm like, okay, where does that come from? Because that's something we talk about all the time on this podcast, where I'm like, is this ADHD or is it because I'm an angry feminist? Right? Because it's like that feeling, I think, as women especially, right? We feel like we have to have exhausted all resources before we ask for help. And medication is essentially help, right? It's support. And so we stubbornly are like, no, I need to figure this out on my own because it's a sign of failure if I need help, right? And so we're like, okay, let's unpack that. But then I also, and I'm just thinking off the fly here because I've never made this connection before right now, but one of the things I feel is really important with parenting neurodivergent children, and and why we end up with these bogus diagnoses like PDA, which I don't know about you, but I think PDA is a ridiculous diagnosis, but pathological demand avoidance. But I'm like, the reason why there is demand avoidance with neurodivergent children is because oftentimes parents kind of swoop in and say, this is how we're going to fix you. And so so the child is saying, you've decided there's something wrong with me and I need fixing. So you fundamentally think that who I am is wrong, right? And so then I'm going to become demand avoidant. And so I think about this idea of how we are often reject this idea of support, because support often to us has looked like fixing us,
Mm-hmm.
fixing who we fundamentally are, as opposed to helping us. And I think there's a real specific difference there, that in childhood, it's like it got messed up where we felt like all help may, and like I said, I'm like, I don't know how clear this is because I'm just thinking this right now, but I'm like, maybe we feel like help is a rejection of who we are. You know what I mean? And that's why we become demand avoidant. So I don't know, but it could also just be that we're women and we're taught to not want, that we're also taught. I think it's all of those things, but but I think there is a specific. There's so much to just say I don't like medication. I feel like it's so much more nuanced than that, right? Like I have a real trouble. I have such issues, internal issues with psychotropic medication for the same reasons that you talk about, right? Which is like I should be able to figure this out, and why am I, what's wrong with me, essentially, that I need this? Why can't I be like everybody else?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so I don't know if I just I think there's something there though, right? Like I think there's something there in terms of feeling like anything that helps us is fixing us, and therefore the being needing fixed is something I think we have this like visceral reaction to.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't know exactly where it comes from. I think about, when we're raising children, and it's an idea of helping, and but not helping too much, right? Helping, because you want them to be able to problem solve, and and use their critical thinking skills. And so this idea, and yeah, it has so much to do with the stigma, right, around like, mental health in general, right, and not being able to I guess what we've been talking about, complete task or do things the way other people have. And we get stuck, I guess, in this idea you're talking about, like, kids, and they're trying to be independent, like I can do it myself and I want to do it. And somewhere, like you said, and I'm not sure where it is, but there it gets confused, this idea of you are strong and independent and you can do all the things, right? But you can't do all the things by yourself. Like, we're not an island. And so for some, you don't want your children to be so dependent that they are helpless, right? And at the same time, you want to be able to offer help. And so along the way, I do believe society just kind of gets us in this place where it's kind of, no, something's wrong with me if I have to take medication. Something's wrong with me if I can't, I can figure everything else out. The other thing about ADHD, though, that's interesting is because there are some things that aren't easily figured out, right? So we talk about the superpowers, and lots of people don't like that word, but the reality of it is there's so many things that we're really good at, right, that would be a struggle or difficult for neurotypicals. And so maybe that's part of it. Maybe it's an idea of like, no, like I can do all these other things. I should be able to do that, So like, why can I do the small little thing? And it's the thing, we can do great big things, like knock out a paper in 1 hour that's like 10 pages, and it's amazing, and you get an A. So if I can do that, I should be able, like you said, to do my taxes, or I should be able to write thank you letters after, and send down and put them in the mail. I should be able to. And so I think that's part of it too. I can do all these great things. Why can't I do this one little stupid thing? Why can't I get off the couch today? Why can't I, go make dinner? And I think that's what it is. It seems like it seems like they're such small tasks that are difficult, right? And so that might have something to do with it, right?
Yeah, that confusion about, like you said, why is this difficult for me when other things are so easy? But I think there's also this like emphasis on consistency that we get from the beginning, right, in school, which is like you have to be good at all things. The valedictorian gets A's in everything, right? And so you're rewarded for consistency, and that's something we are just not consistent. It's not in our DNA. And so I think there is that questioning of like, well, I don't know why I'm good at some things and not others, and what makes, it's really I think what is so incredibly eye-opening about this diagnosis and learning more about how our brains work and executive function and all these things that I had no idea about my whole life, what is this idea of like, oh, this explains why some things feel effortless and why some things feel difficult and what you're going to need to spend extra time on and all of that stuff. But I also think when you're talking about like, at 48, feeling like you weren't able to keep up anymore, that led to the diagnosis. I feel like a lot of women are diagnosed in their 40s because they're just fed up. They're just like, I'm not doing this anymore, right? Like, I am saying no. I'm not saying yes. I'm putting up boundaries. Like, I am sick and tired of doing all this stuff. And so it's like you just get to that point where I don't know if you're old enough that you're just like, no, I'm not doing it anymore. And that's why I feel like a lot of us end up in the diagnosis stage too, where it's like, or and then we blame hormones and perimenopause. But I think a lot of the time it's just like, no, I finally feel empowered enough to say no to a lot of these things I used to take on.
Absolutely, the boundary setting, and along with that comes an increased sense of self, right? So that's the idea too, because if you're struggling with people pleasing and you're in self-esteem issues, and then you get to that, you're right, you get older and you're just like, I don't care anymore. Like, I don't care who likes me, I don't care if you're mad, I don't care if you don't talk to me. Like, I need to kind of just sit down and take care of myself. And perhaps it's that sitting still, right, and sitting with yourself, that's that realization of, wait a minute, right, let maybe all this time there's been something, right, and kind of look at it. And I think, especially if you're a woman, you're, like you said, you're always going and you're taking care of your family and you're taking care of everyone else, and who has time to really do self-care? And so, yeah, placing those boundaries, and starting to take care of yourself, and you start to realize, wow, all this time I've been making it so much harder than it needs to be, right? And so now it's time for me to take care of myself. And that's when you start reading things and you're like, oh my goodness, this has been me all along. And then you want to go, and get the diagnosis and get help. And it's okay. It's the journey. It is what it is.
Well, not only that, but also like that realization that this is not the universal experience. I think so many of us think that this is everyone's experience. And then to suddenly realize that, oh no, I was actually struggling when other people weren't, I think was a big deal too, right? Realizing how much I was struggling, and I was treading water so much I couldn't even acknowledge that I was struggling in these situations when other people, just do things effortlessly.
Absolutely. But you know what's interesting though? To your point, I don't know that everyone does do it effortlessly, right? I think there's a lot of courage in this idea of being able to say, this is hard and I need help, right? We have this uptick of diagnoses, right, in lots of areas. But if everyone were able to be really honest with themselves, I don't know, would there be more? The idea is, how many people really are struggling and just refuse to accept, acknowledge, they don't, are not able to say, yeah, I need help. To your point, they just, refuse help. And it's really hard when we're talking about parents and kids. And sometimes that's a very gentle conversation you have to have with parents, right? When a diagnosis is coming, because for that same reason, parents are kind of like, they look at it as, even parents look at it, something's wrong. Like, I don't want my child to have any, quote unquote diagnosis of anything, of ADHD. That means, right, that, and understandably, from a parent's perspective, what you're looking at then often is like, I just don't want life to be harder for them. I just don't, oh my gosh, I don't want, I want labels and I want things to be harder. Truth of the matter is, it's hard already. And so, the diagnosis allows support, right? It allows the people, the teachers and school and everyone around to say, okay, it opens up doors for your child to have the extra things that they need to be able to get the support so that they can be successful. And so I think, again, what we've been talking about, just this idea of acceptance, right? And having the courage to say, it doesn't mean anything other than I need help. It doesn't, I'm not broken. I'm not crazy because I stay up all night, and I'm not bad. I'm not a bad kid because I have a hard time controlling my impulses. I'm not obnoxious because I interrupt my friends. Like, that's all of those things, and redirecting that, like, it's not a bad thing. It just means you need some extra support, and we can offer that to you. And so I think,
It is so difficult because I know with with my son who's about to go into seventh grade, like I really, both my kids were diagnosed after I was, and my daughter who's in high school has an IEP, or not an IEP, she has a 504 for study, for extra time on tests and, some of the quiet areas and some of the things that are really meaningful for her. But one of the things my husband and I struggle with my younger child is the stigma of the diagnosis in school, right? So like we were, at first when I wanted to get my kids diagnosed, my husband was like, "Oh, but what are the label of ADHD?" And I was like, "Dude, we're already labeled, like you said, we're already going to be getting labels. I've had labels my whole life, but those labels were lazy, disorganized, all of the bad student, all of those were my labels. So let's replace them with this understanding." So for him, I think it was for my son, I think it was super important to get the diagnosis so that he could start to understand his own thinking, like you said. But one of the things we really struggle with is how is he going to be stigmatized at school by his teachers with a 504? Like, what sort of classes are he going to be put in? Is he going to be tracked differently? Because he does really, really well in school. Like, he's a high honors student. And so we're trying to think about like, which is the best time to, get him a 504 that it's not going to hinder how he is viewed, because it's ADHD is still so stigmatized and still so understood. And so the stereotypes are there in the classroom, and we're in like a rural environment where I don't feel like the teachers have any clue the spectrum of ADHD, in kids, especially kids who perform well and have high anxiety. So we're like every year we're kind of like trying to figure out like what is the best decision until he, with my daughter, I feel like she's old enough that she can advocate for herself. And so, like you said, she doesn't have to lead with, "I have ADHD." She's old enough to now say, "I need these accommodations." And for us, the diagnosis allows us to ask for help without having it to be, we don't have to always say it's ADHD. We can just ask for help now because it gives us the permission. But anyway, I'm like, when you were talking about that with school, I was like, in an ideal world, yes, teachers would be able to accommodate. But I also feel like as a parent, we're terrified that our child is going to be treated poorly as a result of the ADHD diagnosis, right? And I feel like, and part of me feels like, oh, well, now we're just like buying into this we're allowing the stigma and stereotype to continue because we are being so quiet and private about it. But at the same time, it's like, well, when it comes to my individual child, I don't know what the best, right? I'm not going to be I'm not going to be a social justice warrior when it comes to my individual child. I'll just do it on the podcast instead. So, right? So it's like we're making changes in other places, but until it's better understood in the classroom, I don't know. Anyway, I think it's complicated.
It is complicated. It's funny that you said that. It's easier to be social justice warrior on the podcast, but you can be an avid advocator even at
Yes.
home, right? So the idea is, right, you simply kind of what you're probably already doing. One of the things that we help parents do, at my company, it's very much helping teachers in the school understand this continuity of care for your child, right? Here's what works at home, right? Teachers, when they're sending notes home, and we're sitting down to read, and your child is having a hard time sitting still or whatever it is. And then, you already know what works for your child. It's so interesting because you can have all kinds of experts, coaches and therapists and all kinds of school counselors and all those people in and out of your lives as a parent, as a child. People that come to helpers, right? And they can have all the education in the world and all the best intentions and can be very well meaning, but no one knows your child the way you do. And so their job then is to come alongside of you and say, okay, what's working, what works for your specific child, right? Just kind of like you talked about, what works for your son and what's not going to work. And so whether we're leading with a diagnosis or not, being able to advocate with the teachers, right? And say, listen, what you're doing is, he's reacting this way, or he's not doing well in the situation because we have found that doing it this way works better for him. And, the hope then, right, is that the teachers care enough to say, okay, let's talk about this. Is there some way I can do that? How can I make adjustments to the classroom or his schedule or what's happening that can make I think that's when the 504s and the IEPs come in, because it's the idea of it's very hard when you have a classroom full of 23 or 25 kids to kind of just make that's kind of what you hear. We can't make an adjustment for one kid, but you can. Like you actually can, and it's necessary because we're trying to help these children be successful. It's all about inclusion, right? It's always about that. Like how can we make sure that um, this child gets what they need so they can be successful? And so I, for sure, advocate.
I know, right? And well, it makes me laugh because I feel like there are those old school teachers who roll their eyes at 504s where they're like, everybody wants a 504 these days. And you're like, yeah, everybody wants to be treated as an individual. Like, why is that so revolutionary, right? Or radical? Why is it so radical to feel like each child has their own way of learning? Because it's so antithetical to the classroom environment right now in American education. Oh, there I am on a soapbox again. Okay. I want to stop because I want to talk about tailored glory. And congratulations on your podcast, by the way. I listened to your first episode of the Vision Exchange podcast. I'll have a link to that in the show notes. It was a lovely conversation, and you guys talk about the origin of the name Tailored Glory, which is the name of your consulting group. So can you just tell us a little bit about the name?
Sure. So I came up with Tailored Glory. Glory is obviously like a spin-off of my name, Gloria. And I thought about the dictionary definition of tailored and glory and what they mean. And so the dictionary definition of tailored is, um, you know, created specifically for an individual, right? And glory being this idea of magnificence, pride in something that you've achieved, right? To have glory in something. And so when I think about coaching and helping children and families and adults kind of reach their goals, I want to make sure that we can help them tailor a program that is specifically for them. And it's really just what we just had a conversation about, in the school. It's not one size fits all. Like everything doesn't work for everyone. So really wanting to get to know our specific clients and what is it that works for you, what hasn't been working, what is it that you need, right? And then helping you kind of work towards your goal so that you can feel as though you've achieved what you wanted to achieve. And so we use this tagline, let us help you tailor a life that you can be proud of, right? That you can take pride in your achievements and things that you've done. And so that's kind of where that name comes from, wanting to help people do that.
Awesome. I love it. So, and I love how varied or holistic the approach is with the group, right? So it's like everybody, there's 4 of you currently, right?
Correct. Yes. 4 coaches.
But I love how each one of the people, each one of the experts in the group has such a different approach. It just feels like such a nice, holistic patchwork view, and I feel like that's something. In terms of neurodivergent experience, one of the things I feel is so important is to have those places where we can go, where you feel like you can have, your handheld, for lack of a better word, through so many different processes. And so many of us get diagnosed and we go to the doctor's office and they're like, yep, you have ADHD, here's some medication, goodbye. And then you're like left to your own devices, right? So I love seeing more opportunities to feel like you are being helped, or held, right? In terms of this treatment plan. A treatment plan is not just medication. It's all the things, and all the things we've talked about. So, yeah, I just wanted to say that it's awesome how everybody seems to have such this varied approach. And I think it's such a wonderful resource to have. So, yeah, how can people, so it's called tailoredglory.com, and it's really you tell me about how, we talked about the executive functioning coaching, but there's also some other things that you work with people, right?
Sure. So again, we kind of call that executive functioning for kids because, like, as I said, regardless, kids are growing in their executive functioning, right? So when they're starting as children, just kind of learning how to think through processes. And so we do that to kind of help children grow in that. We also work specifically with kids that have been diagnosed with ADHD and adults. So adults that either have the diagnosis have had it for a while or are newly diagnosed and like, okay, now what do I do? Kind of to your point, I've got this diagnosis and now what? So we kind of work through some of those things. And then we also do behavioral health coaching. And so there are several of us that are also therapists that have turned professional coaches as well. So we have that background. And so we do a lot of, again, even though it's coaching, but touching pieces of what gets in the way, right? So what gets in the way for you when you're trying to attain some of your goals, and they could be with anything. And so we're talking about weight loss, we're talking about relationships. It could be again your career. Where do you want to go next in your career, or building a business for yourself, or whatever it is. And so whatever someone is kind of wanting someone to come alongside them and say, okay, I need to get from this step to the next one and I don't know what to do next. And so that's kind of what we do. And I do love what you said about my team, right? The team that's there, everyone has a different, like you said, a different specialty. We've got Jamie, who does health and wellness coaching, and so she's all about like healthy lifestyle, exercising and nutrition, right? And so if medication is not the way, but eating healthy helps, it helps. It really helps, making sure that you're getting exercise, you're getting outside and moving and all of those things. And so, she focuses a lot on that. We have Nicole, who is, we call her mom extraordinaire. That's kind of our nickname for her is, and she's got 4 children at home, and she's also got a daughter that is ADHD. So she has autism and ADHD together. And she's just, amazing at being able to tailor her family, and what they do in their home life to kind of make sure that her daughter can be successful and not have to worry about that stigma that you're talking about, and giving her the tools that she needs to overcome some of those things and to advocate for herself. And so she's great at coming alongside parents, right, that are kind of struggling with, okay, now we have this diagnosis, what do we do, right? And then we have Anae, who she's a PhD, and she's been with us. She has been working with children for many, many years. And so again, her specialty is really just looking at what other people see as deficits and problem behaviors, and really understanding that no, these are children that need extra support, and being able to put things in place to kind of help. And so yeah, you can find us. Our website is, like you said, www.tailoredglory.com. We're also on Instagram at tailoredglory. And so if you need help, we're here for you.
Now, do you guys work as a team ever with individuals or with families, or do families come and kind of they choose one of you based on what their most imminent needs are? Because I feel like I don't know, I'm like brainstorming here. I'm like feeling like you could do like coaching, like group coaching powerhouse sessions with all 4 of you, because you all bring so much to the table.
That would be great. Something that we are thinking about doing. Right now, we do individual coaching. But yeah, we are just talking about doing group coaching and pulling all of the resources together, because you're right. Everyone has like a different background, experience, and knowledge, and bringing it all together to group coaching for kids or for families is something that we would love to do. And so if anyone has an interest in doing that, maybe you should do that. Kind of put feelers out there to see if there's an interest for group coaching. That would be a great idea. We've been talking about it.
Right. Well, especially when it comes to executive functioning coaching, I feel like there's always one of the things that I find with my own group coaching experience is how resourceful everybody in the group is. So that opportunity, like people are there to learn, but I think that one of the great things about group coaching is that people teach what works for them, right? And I think like as neurodivergents, we're always like, that's how we research, right? We research by crowdsourcing. And, because the first thing we do is like go to YouTube or go to Facebook and try to, when we have a question. And so it's like, I feel like that group coaching dynamic is so perfectly set up for like group think, hive mind kind of thing. So yeah.
And finding your people, right? That's the other thing, you need to find your people. That's, the tribe that you feel comfortable in, and you all understand me. And so we also talk to kids about that as well. Like, everyone's not going to be your friend. That's okay. Find your people.
Right, exactly. If you've ever had a problem, like if you've ever felt like you'd had difficult time making friends or connecting to people, it's like get into a room with other neurodivergents and you'll be like, oh my god, I'm home. Yeah, totally. Right. I know. It's such a huge, I always say that I'm like finding each other and finding community is one of the most important parts of our treatment plan is being able to validate each other and listen to each other and share our stories like here, like you just did on the podcast.
I appreciate
Beautiful. Well, that's so awesome. I'm so glad I found you, and I love what you're doing. And I really, I'm such a huge proponent of combining coaching, and therapeutic and the therapeutic alliance. And I think it's so wonderful to be able to kind of say I've been there and I understand what you're going through, but also coming up with some strategies and for moving forward and some of the you put it better, so I'm not even going to bother. So just some of the like support in terms of what are those next steps, right? Thinking about executive function in terms of like it's just a bunch of steps. We just have to figure out which one to take first and then next, and then we'll do it together. Awesome. Well, thank you, Gloria. This has been lovely. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And yeah, so I'll have all those links in the show notes. But yeah, are you working on anything exciting coming up for the fall? Not that you don't have a million things on your to-do list already, but
I mean, we are definitely working on doing some things kind of here. We are in Pennsylvania, and well, actually, I'm in Pennsylvania, but we work with people all over the country, all over the country, and so doing some things locally with some of the schools here. We have our podcast, and so we do the podcast that you listen to that's on our website, and then we post that. It's on Spotify and also on Apple Podcasts, right? And so it's called the Vision Exchange. Taylor Glory presents the Vision Exchange. But one thing that I've also done too, one of the things that I love, there's music kind of calms me down and kind of helps me, and there's a certain a certain kind of music I listen to, and I don't really know what it's called. I guess they call it like lo-fi, I guess maybe what it is. I call it the groovy music, basically. It's kind of how I described it. And I started to think to myself, it's the kind of music that I use to drive to and do tasks to, and it struck me that other people might like that as well. And so I decided to do a countdown, right? And so every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we release what I consider the Vision Exchange. I call it the wind down, gear up countdown. And so it's for you to wind down from your week and then gear up for next week and do all the things that you need to do. And we kind of just do that old school style, get on the radio and just play all of those groovy songs that kind of help people focus. And so we play lots of like classical and binaural beats and the lo-fi beats, and we just, and so that's something that, people can check out as well on Sunday evenings to kind of help you to get ready to, get
I
ready
love that. So how do we find it? Do you go onto Spotify?
It's actually,
Is it?
yeah, go on Spotify. And so if you type in Taylor Glory or type in the Vision Exchange, because or it's called the Wind Down Gear Up Countdown. So that's a lot actually, but it's under our Taylor Glory podcast, right? It's under the Vision Exchange. And so
As playlists. Oh, awesome. Okay, I'll put a link to that too. That sounds so fun. That's Sunday nights.
yeah.
And it's 9 p.m. Eastern.
It releases at 9 p.m. Eastern. You can listen to it all week, but it won't be live.
The new ones come out. Oh, that's so cool. I love that. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Gloria.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks for having me. I had a good time talking to you. Thank you so much.